Good evening, everyone, and good morning to all those who joined us from the other side of the globe. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome three global leaders in today's Chronicles of Executive Presence. Most of you would have heard their stories, their journeys in the fireside chats that were there in the last couple of weeks. Having them here with me and going into a deeper discussion on what exactly is executive presence in the global context, I have with me Abhinav Singhal. Abhinav is the VP Revenue and GTM Strategy at SAP, and he's an ex-McKinsey person. I also have with me Mr. Amit Sharma. Amit is the head of procurement, specialty vehicles at Daimler Trucks. And I have with me Pallavi. Pallavi is the quality and risk lead at Accenture North America. So welcome for the panel discussion.
Thanks,
Good morning, afternoon.
Good evening for Nandita and good morning to everybody.
Okay, so we've had a fireside chat and all of you did share your journeys with us as to what has been, according to what is leadership, executive presence, and what do you think makes you a great leader today. I'm going to go straight into the topic and I'm going to ask you a question. Most of you came up with your own definitions or your own understanding of the components of executive presence. The question is, was there any one incident in your life that made you actually realize that this is the importance of executive presence? Or is it that it was a journey kind of a thing? So I'll pose a question to Abhinav first and then we can move to the other two leaders. Yeah.
I think I mentioned it briefly in the fireside chat as well, Nandita, that for me, when I started my career with consulting, as a first year, second year associate into consulting, I remember an incident where I was participating in a client meeting and we were making a recommendation on the strategy, sharing some of the insights which we have worked over the last few weeks in the project. And we were talking to the CEO of the client. And there were a lot of questions and discussions during the meeting, and I was more or less quiet, observing the project manager and the partners leading that conversation. And after that meeting, I got a feedback from the project manager saying, if you were invited to the meeting and if you had participated and leading bulk of the analysis, why didn't you contribute and responded to some of the questions which were discussed during the conversation? And I said, I thought the partner is supposed to lead the meeting. My job is just to do the work and hand it over to you. And that's when I realized that apart from just having a formal leadership role in a meeting and then exhibiting presence, there is also an element of, if you are being part of any conversation, any meeting, any discussion, how do you earn the respect of being invited to that discussion, right? So for me, the journey or the learning was, if you are participating in a meeting or invited in a meeting, you need to earn that respect, earn that invite, and contribute. You cannot just be a silent listener. And you could do it again through verbal, non-verbal gestures, through various mechanisms. But for me, that was one lesson which I took away. If I'm in a meeting, I need to contribute.
Okay, so Amit, what are your views and would you agree or disagree with Abhinav on this now?
No, I agree with Abhinav, and I would just add to that. Certainly, like, you have to be participative, an active listener and participant. However, if I look at from the perspective of, from my experiences, while early on during the career, when I had got the responsibility to lead a global team, when I was working for my initial company in US, I was given a team who were sitting in different continents. Okay, you had 7 continents you're working on that time, and then all the different regions and cultural differences. First of all, understanding those differences and how would they hear you. What Abhinav was trying to say, that okay, first of all, it's not like you are just participating. First of all, other side people should listen to you. And why would they listen to you until unless you bring a value in your discussions, in your thoughts? And secondly, what are you expecting from them? Because it has to be a conversation. It cannot be a one way. So from a leadership perspective, how would you encourage others also to participate and creating that environment? So I think that was so when you talk about executive presence, it's not only executive presence of the person. We are talking about only the self I think the overall you are in an environment where others can also view you and you can view the others too. It's like it's a mutual. So I think that becomes a really important aspect.
Moving on, and this is a very valid question. Pallavi, you have had a completely different experience from the other two gentlemen sitting here. So, was it an aha moment to say, okay, I need to have executive presence? Or do you think it was more of a journey or a thing to say, yes, executive presence is something that I need to build on?
I had an aha moment actually very early before even my professional career, if you will.
Oh, okay.
I certainly agree with Amit and Abhinav on their experiences, and I have similar views. But my experience happened actually when I was in high school. And I was editor-in-chief of our newspaper, and I had to go meet with an NGO at the time, the leaders in NGO. We were writing an article about it. And my co-editor-in-chief had come with me, but I was the editor-in-chief. I was the more sort of senior person in that. And in that meeting, my colleague that went with me spoke the entire time. And I said very little. And then the NGO leaders that were there assumed that she was in charge. It's kind of a similar pattern in my life. And it was the aha moment, like, oh, I actually need to say something here in order to establish my presence. So it started very early for me. It took me a long time to overcome it, but I definitely was aware. And then you need, as Abhinav said, you need to say something. If you're in a meeting, you need to establish your presence. So that was my sort of aha moment. And then just saying one thing about what Amit said, which I think is super important. When you're a leader yourself, how you help others develop out that executive presence is really important. I can recall one meeting that I had maybe just 5 years ago, where an individual came up to me at the end of the meeting and he thanked me for. He said, "I want to thank you," and I said, "Oh, please tell me. We don't get thanks that very often," and he said, "Well, you acknowledged my point." And
Awesome.
and it really made me step back and say, gee, when I'm leading a meeting myself, how am I letting everybody have a voice and creating that experience and the ability for those individuals to have their own executive presence? Because if you just display your own executive presence, you could be taking away from everybody that is around you. And it's so important to let everybody else around you rise and have their voice and let them feel like they're being heard. Otherwise, they'll stop speaking and then you won't get the best out of your team.
Absolutely.
I think it's a very valid point the three of you have brought out, that not only do you need to exhibit or elude executive presence, but also encourage your teams and other people to actually have that, because that are the signs of a good leader. Now, the three of you, the example that you used, and I'm sure there are many more examples that you have, we're talking more in terms of a meeting scenario. So my question is, and any one of you can answer that, is it more specific to meetings where it's a one-to-many, or is it a day-to-day or a part and parcel of your life? So how do you actually see executive presence? Is it a part of who you are? Like I say, it becomes a part of you, or it's more something that you need to put on like a blazer just before you go for a meeting kind of a thing. So I would like you to, reflect and tell me what has been your journey on that point, and any one of you can answer that for me.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Pallavi.
I was going to say, I think it becomes a part of you to some extent, because your professional life is so much a part of who you are every single day.
Very true.
And at the same time, I do understand that sometimes I have to take the jacket off, especially in your home life, or if you're interacting socially, you can't be the person that's in charge all the time. And I actually enjoy it. In some ways, it's a little bit of a relief not to be the large in charge person all of the time, and sort of take a back seat. That can be somewhat relaxing. So I think I have the ability to take the jacket on or off, but it definitely it requires some thought. It's not natural for me anyways. I'm curious how the others feel about it.
Yeah, no, I think agree, Pallavi. One thing for sure is needed is when you are a leader, early on, I remember some of the person told me that you're always constant watch. So your team, your members, your colleagues, everybody is watching you. So the moment you enter into the environment, I would not say an office building or a meeting room. If you are in a professional world, you are under constant watch. Okay, whatever you do.
CCTV cameras.
Yeah, it's like so it's like so people do see that. So if you would like to have
Yeah.
an executive presence or would like to be recalled by as a good leader, a strong leader, or a individual, I think you have to have that at any time, at every aspect of you, and uh, and you call it like you are wearing it basically artificially, but that is not. It will work. You have to imbibe it. It should become more your own values, your become more own style, as always. You cannot pretend it. So you have to live, as in Pallavi's terms, you have to live two lives, because the moment you're out from the professional world, you have to remain as normal as you could be, correct? With your family, with your friends, you have to be different. However, that is how it should be. Means a person should be able to behave and act uh, differently, and this is what is that's why the question of executive presence comes: can you adopt or not? Means, but that is something I think we can talk about it.
Yeah,
But
I have that question, Amit, and
okay.
I will come back to that question. Is
Yeah,
it adapted? And I will go deeper into that because that's one
sure.
of the key things I want all of you to answer for me there. Yes. So you were completing something, Amit. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I would say, yeah. So that way you have to remain conscious, and it has to be always on. You have
So
to
conscious
remain
and
conscious.
always on.
Yeah.
Pallavi says there are times when you need to take off that jacket and take the back seat. Okay, Abhinav, your views on this now.
I think a bit similar, honestly, to what Amit was also saying, because I do feel that executive presence needs to be consistent across different point of interactions.
Okay.
So, as you said, meeting
Okay.
is a common example because that's the most common
Yeah.
way you would interact in an office setting. But even when you are walking the aisle, even when you are talking to a colleague, or when you are, as you said, uh, chatting with someone, across each of that interaction, how do you have a consistent personality character that just makes it more authentic?
Okay.
There might be a line between office and home, which Pallavi alluded to, which I agree, that there you might be more conscious, or you might have a role which you connect with and portray at office, and that's the role which you're leading and being consistent on. But at home, you want to be a bit more relaxed, informal, and not always be in charge. So I think there I agree with Pallavi. But I think in office it's important to be consistent. Otherwise, you are not credible if you just have it on some points and you're conflicting with other interactions.
So consistency is what Abhinav talks about.
Yeah.
But there's something that I heard the three of you say, and I have, I would like to get your views on one thing. So we say we have to be authentic. It has to be consistent. That came out. It becomes a part of you. Amit said you have to imbibe it, right? Very true. But my question is, if it becomes a part of you, if you are, you are imbibing it, and you are real and authentic, the values that you're talking about. How do you change from office to home? Because we're talking executive presence. If I look at the term in terms of appearance, so what exactly do you mean here when you say you need to take a step back, you need to do it differently at home because you cannot be the same person? Are we talking authenticity of values, or are we talking in terms of appearances? What is it that you guys mean is what I wanted to know, because it can be perceived by our viewers that you need to have one persona at home and one persona at work. Is that what we are heading towards? So a little more light on that, please.
I think from my perspective, I can go first.
Yeah.
It's more around
Sure.
the constant nudge, right, or the conversation you have back of the mind, and how are you being perceived in an office
Okay.
setting, and are you coming across as credible and authentic, and displaying the right confidence which you need to inspire and lead the team. So when you're in a home
Okay.
setting, you can let the
Huh.
guard down and not be so self-conscious and self-aware all the time, right? You can come
Awesome.
across
Okay.
even at times not super credible, or you can be more relaxed. So I think for me it's more the mindset of being self-aware and self-conscious, versus at
Okay.
home being less focused on that and just being more natural.
Okay. Amit.
Yeah, and so I would add to that. I think
Yeah, go
very
ahead.
nicely described by Abhinav. One thing comes up there. If you remember in the fireside chat, I spoke about the three C's there. Okay,
Yes.
the content, character, and the commitment. We talk about it. When we talk about that, so from the professional perspective, you always remain conscious or deliberate about the content what I have acquired through the education, through the environment, through the various learnings. And you have to remain in the constant hunt of refining it as you go along. That am I bringing the value? What I'm doing. So you are always in the constant churning of keep yourself. Am I sharpening myself? Am I honing my skills? So you remain conscious, you adopt, and you change, you learn. So you keep doing that. So that's where the deliberation and the personal commitment comes into the picture. And from the character perspective, certainly, what are your own values? Whether you talk about that, I'm a passionate person, I'm a disciplined. So these are all consciously you have to ensure. However, when you are not in that environment or the setup, that's where, as it was mentioned, that you have to little bit relaxed, let it go in front of your family members. You don't have to be correct. It's o-
So, okay. So,
it's okay. It's okay to shy away from the sense of not always under the constant hunt of something. Yeah.
not being constantly under pressure is something that people are suggesting, if I hear you correctly. Pallavi, do you agree with that, or anything that you would like to add from your own experience?
Yeah, I mean, I have a slightly different take on it, I would say,
Sure.
in the
Yeah.
sense that I think that you can be authentic and still have different approaches and styles
Okay.
as you go through different phases, whether it's in your professional life or personal life. And maybe I think of it in this way. One, it's really about leadership skills in terms of what is that environment that you need? What do the people around you need from you? And so when you think about it from a professional standpoint, then it's, having that executive presence and being in charge or being able to set a direction, all of those things. But at home, I think about it in what does my family need from me? And that's about leadership, right? So in that case, if you think about a child, that child doesn't need you to be large in charge all of the time. You need to create the space for them to have their voice and all of those things. And if you don't adapt and start operating like you are at work, you will drown out your children because they need the place to flourish also. And so I, in some ways, I feel very conscious about that. And I don't think it's inauthentic. I think about it in a way of it's about what does the environment that you're in at that moment need the most from you? And your ability to adapt. And I think all of us have said adaptability is actually key on this. And the other thing that hasn't really come up that I think is also important in executive presence is to be human. And, it isn't just about playing a role. It is about being human because people relate to humans. They don't relate to a role, they relate to you. And so you can't also be so robotic about what you're doing. And sometimes showing vulnerability is okay because it actually lets people see you in a different light. So it's a very, I would say, nuanced kind of thing. And every environment or scenario that you're in requires you to be a little bit of a different persona, if you will. But again, not because you're being inauthentic, but because it's what's required of you as a leader in whatever situation you're in.
So that brings me to a question which I think, Pallavi, you triggered right now. You said it is expected. It's one of the more key things is to be human, and humans have emotions. You should be okay showing vulnerability. And if you are, and that I think is something that is spoken so much about in the corporate world today, saying that you cannot be vulnerable. Like Amit said, guards should be up, right? Another word, right? You need to elude that confidence, that charisma day in, day out. Now, when I'm doing all that and my true self and my core values talk about connect and empathy being one of the core skills of leaders today, which thanks to pandemic, every research that is done today talks about empathy being the core skill. How is this aligned in the corporate world today, especially in the geographies that you come from? Because one side we are saying, don't show emotions, be right there, focus on task, results, data. The second time we say, okay, have emotions. It's okay to be vulnerable because you're humans. And if you're authentic, all of us have emotions. So
right,
a lot of conflicts there, right? So
I think it takes a lot of confidence to show vulnerability.
Yeah.
And people see that.
Beautiful.
And also it's okay to say, people are not going to give you their opinion if they feel like they're not going to be heard. And they're not going to give you their opinion if you always say, well, my way is right. Again, it comes back to how do you bring the team up to do the right thing when you're talking about the professional world. And I feel very strongly that showing some level of vulnerability actually makes you more relatable. People will work harder for you. They will be more creative because you've created the space for them to be vulnerable. So I think it's very natural. And, again, I go back to being human, and just showing who you are, and also using humor. I think that's the other thing, vulnerability and humor. I think when you create an environment where there's some sense of humor and you can laugh at yourself or laugh at each other, that actually allows so much creativity. And that's actually something I've learned in my professional career. It did not start in the beginning. So it's something I now use more, and it's quite effective in diffusing difficult situations, but also creating an environment of creativity.
Yep. You rightly said, Pallavi. I would just add to that. When you say like a humor, I would say, I always say that a leader has to be sincere than serious. Okay, having a frown on the face and always showing a gesture of that I could be strong only if I show that from my face that, okay, yes, you have to listen to me. However, from the vulnerability point of view, I think it's always good to have first leaders speak last. Okay, let it be. You are not driving always the discussions. And secondly, even if you sometimes in front of your team, it's not only about the failing, it's about acknowledging that, yeah, I may not be knowing everything about it, correct? So I am willing to listen to you, and please give me the ideas, because you are there to sometimes give the directions, sometimes give talking about more from the strategy point of view, but it's always to harness that environment. Yes, I'm not aware, I'm not the subject matter expert here. You all could be. Please chime in, give me your thoughts, views. I think that's where, so you're not showing that, okay, a kind of that, okay, I don't know about it, but you are showing your vulnerability in terms of that, yes, I do not know all the all
So
about
it's
this
okay
topic,
not to know.
or yeah, not to know, it's okay about it, but at least what is your role in that case? Yes. So and in the VUCA world, what you talk about nowadays, all this VUCA world, I think
most
vulnerability
popular word.
plays a very, very key aspect of it.
So, Amit, before I jump to Abhinav on that, and when you say vulnerability, and I would like Abhinav also to answer this later, and vulnerability is seen as a very different word in different geographies, gender specific, and I would bring that in, and though I don't go too much into gender thing, but it is not a very inclusive word, because the way women see vulnerability vis-a-vis the way men see it, the way it is seen in different in the subcontinent and in different geographies is very different. So if you could just tell me, what is it that you mean when you say vulnerability? It would be nice to throw some light on that. Also, when you're dealing with different genders and different geographies, and you are again in a global role, how does that impact in your day-to-day working? And then I'll come to Abhinav for this answer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, vulnerability. How I would see, and how would I perceive that is, and a situation or an environment, how a person would react or behave, and may not be at his or her best. Okay. There could be a situation that yes, so and so situation, you a leader may not remain as calm as he or she could be. Okay, so
Okay.
if he or she loses their a normal way and might behave differently. Okay, that shows the vulnerability that yes, I think if we go beyond this point, if there are three people arguing and putting their point across strongly, or I think this leader steps back and suddenly become conscious and may not react as he would have been or he or she would have been reacted normally. So
So
that
there's a
shows
threshold
that,
that you're talking
that yeah,
about.
so that creates kind of a vulnerability. Oh, okay, then it could be perceived. People may or may not realize it, but that person, if you are truthful to yourself, you know that. Oh yes, I become conscious that time. I think that shows that this is what I have to improve upon if I need to do. Means if somebody feels that way, so I think that shows the vulnerability point of view. And secondly, from the perspective of the global cultural perspective, yeah, being in Asia, being an Asian, being an Indian, sitting in a global role, you know how the different geographies play. How would a German behave? How an American will behave? A Japanese, an Indian, everybody has a different way. Sometimes you express it, sometimes you don't express it. Some of the cultures are really too strongly expressive. So, so in that case, sometimes you become conscious and you just keep quiet. Okay, and sometimes you become conscious and you talk a lot and more loudly. Some of the cultures have that. So I will not
Yeah,
pinpoint those cultures. What I'm trying to say is
sure.
this is how it works. So how would you react in those environment? I think that creates that.
Okay, so Amin, I'm moving on to you with the same question.
Sure, sure.
Go ahead.
So I was just
Yeah,
thinking, right? Maybe the best way to think about this, let's take an example. Let's go a couple of years back. The
yeah.
pandemic has broken out. Everybody is anxious. We don't know what we are supposed to do. How long will the corona crisis last? And you're leading a team, you have to address the team. Now, there are a couple of ways you can approach that conversation. A, you can come across in full control and you can go with a global messaging which your comm team has prepared. Everything is under control. Don't worry. We will figure out the situation. You can work from home and we can respond right with to the task, and there will be no disruption, blah blah blah, right? The more uh, textbook answer. The second option is you can say that, as a leader, I've also experienced something which we all have experienced for the first time as a humankind, as a race. We have had problems at home as well. I'm still struggling to figure out how will this impact me personally, professionally, and you can just show that you're also a part of the same team and a human being who's going through the same experience as they are going,
Excellent.
and suddenly you are able to establish that connect and that emotional engagement with your team members, that we are part of the same team and we are all expressing as humans the same crisis, and let's figure out a way together and how do we respond to that. So I think that is vulnerabilities, that how do you let your guard down and come across in situations where you need to authentic, credible, and engage, because ultimately as a leader you need to figure out how can you define what's in it for me, for your different team members, and take them along to a common purpose. And that can only happen when you put that effort of an understanding where each and everyone is coming from, what's going on their mind. There's a mindset and there is a behavior. So I think for me it's all about understanding the mindset and then playing on to that,
Yes.
because then you have a much much stronger followership and engagement with the team to arrive at an outcome.
So, Abhinav, this is specifically for you, and then I'll move to Pallavi with the same question. You are a young leader, and when I say young, in terms of number of years of experience, because of your credibility that you've established in the organization, you've moved quite fast as compared to a lot of young leaders that we see. So, does age at times and work in your favor when you say show yourself as vulnerable? Is it perceived, and that is what I want to ask you, is it perceived as something that, oh, he's a young leader so he may not have answers, or oh, he's a young leader, that is why? Because again, maybe not in the continent, the part of the world that you work in, but in the Indian subcontinent at times it is seen when young leaders show themselves as vulnerable, they are not seen as very effective leaders, that we quote unquote that. So what has been your experience there?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I would say even in my current role based out of Singapore, we still have that Asian culture where typically age and years of experience are a strong
True.
correlation to the credibility, right, which you bring
True.
to a particular role. Uh, And the way you navigate around that is you ensure that if you're talking about a topic, how do you build credibility beyond age as well? So ultimately, age is a symbol of credibility and the experience which you bring to the table, right? So for me, the way I've navigated around is what are the other dimensions which I can add, data points which I can highlight, experiences which I can talk about, which can bring the same amount of credibility with the age would have given. So if I, for example, if I'm working on a strategy topic, I'll bring my McKinsey experience in to demonstrate that credibility that I know what is it to make strategy about. Or when it is talking about, let's say, digital transformation, I will highlight my technology experience in. So for me, I think yes, as a culture, we are still getting used to having more young leaders compared to the more experienced ones. But you have to understand that ultimately it is a judge of the experience you bring. And the homework you need to do is what are the other experiences you can highlight to fill that gap, which a typical age would have done, right, in any other normal situation or circumstance.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, because I do see a lot of young leaders grapple with this very often. And that brings me to Pallavi, which again, Pallavi, you mentioned in your previous, the fireside chat that you were different, right, from the others because you were the first in many ways in your organization, and you've grown up that way. So how different was it for you to show vulnerability and not be taken as not a strong leader? Is something I would want to know. And the second point for you in particular is that you work with geographies right from Japan to US, and there is a huge difference in the culture. How do you, work as a woman leader, again, very specifically, and show your vulnerability at the same time, maintain that aura or that leadership role that you had in?
Lots of ways I could answer this question.
Go ahead. The time is all
a
yours.
couple of things. Again, to being authentic, I think, and to being a strong leader, one of the things that you can use to show vulnerability is actually to say, I don't know this topic. And I think, Amit, you were talking about that. Or I don't actually understand what you're saying. It's a really powerful way to do it versus, and people relate to you much better, versus trying to pretend you understand what the other person is saying, and then you don't get the most out of the conversation. I mean, how many times have any one of us have been in a meeting? We're like, I have no idea what that person is saying, right? We've all been in those meetings. And so I think it's kind of, again, being authentic and vulnerable to say, I actually don't understand what you're saying. And then you hear three other people say, I didn't understand either. So I think that is a way to show it. I think as a woman leader, there's a couple things that happen, and I'm going to answer the young question as well.
Sure, go ahead.
When you are in consulting, you get a lot of opportunity very quickly, maybe faster than if you're not in consulting, and so the age piece comes into play quite a bit to some extent because. And it may be self-imposed, right? But you're like, oh my gosh, I'm 25 years old and I'm having to go talk to the CEO or C-level person. Will they actually even listen to me? And the answer is really about if you have the content, they'll listen to you. And it is about content and preparation. As it relates to being a woman leader, there's two experiences I had that kind of raised my awareness. And it was earlier in my career. One was when I got married a year after I started working, and everybody assumed that I would really quit in a few short years and go have kids. And it took me, first of all, I didn't understand that that's how everybody was perceiving me. And it took somebody who was a coach of mine to tell me. And then I had to go ask for things like, I want that next promotion, or I care about this next role. So I had to very consciously do those that I don't think my male counterparts had to do, but it was something that I had to do. Second is I was 3 years into my consulting career. I was very young, maybe 24 years old. And I got asked to go to Singapore to sell a $200 million deal, which 30 years ago was a very large deal. And I was, I had so many emotions about it. I was so scared to go do it. One, I was a woman. I was worried about Singapore culture. I was like, will they even listen to me? I recognized after going through that experience that so much of it was self-imposed. And when I leaned in on I actually know something about the topic. That's why I was sent. And I'm going to focus in on the content of what I know and less about, all of the perceptions of how I might be perceived either as an Indian in Singapore or as a woman in Singapore. And I know Singapore has progressed a lot. This is like 1990, but I was really worried about it. But again, you lean on the content, and then you learn from those experiences. And then the last thing I would say is, I've had the ability to work with teams all over the world. And I think, Amit, you talked about this. How you interact with each team is also different. And again, you still are authentic to who you are. But when I worked with a Japan team and I went out there to help them with something, the first thing I did, and recognized, and I studied the culture a little bit, the first thing I did when I got there was said, how can I help you? And, the leader of the Japan office that said, he said that you're the first Western person, because I was coming from the US, the first Western person that's actually asked my opinion. And it was a little bit about, how do you get into the culture that you're in versus you staying in the culture that you are. So those are some lessons learned for me.
So it's about what I hear all of you say. It's all in your mindset, basically, how you actually take it. And then based on, and the three of you also spoke about content being very critical, you being an expert or you knowing your content when you know it. So that helps you bring the credibility. That's a very interesting thought process there. Moving on, and a question that I have for you is, have there ever been a conflict when you have tried to project your true authentic self at work and somewhere it did not go right? I would like you to share those moments and what did you do and what were your learnings? So how did you, come out of it? And I'm sure all of you would have come out of it. So what were some of the things that you did at that time to help young leaders say that one setback in an organization or at a place where you try to be the best and you're not, that's not the be all and end all of the world today. So, and how do you work around it? So, anybody who would like to go there, and
I can
go ahead.
Quick one. This is more about changing roles, which is where you experience this a lot. So, I remember after consulting, when I first moved into the corporate world, I came with a mindset that I need to create and add value in every conversation. I need to come across as an expert on the topic because I'm coming from a consulting McKinsey experience. And I realized that can come across in a new organization, a new setup, that can be perceived as somebody who's very aggressive and very assertive all the time. So it's all about, again, the learning was listening more than telling. And especially when you're new into a role or a job, I see a lot of times we have this 100 days plan where we want to go ahead and solve for world hunger in the first 100 days. But actually the real value you can drive is just listening and understanding the context, the stakeholders, the relationships, what has been done in the past, and then figuring out what is really required in that setup to create value. So I feel that was one experience, and maybe it doesn't directly answer your question, but especially when you're changing roles or changing jobs, I think helping to just invest the time in listening really helps a lot.
Awesome.
I can add an example there, similar to like what Abhinav said. When you change the roles, I remember having worked in the US for more than 12 years. I got the opportunity to work in India. Okay, now you are and being a leader there to start with, and you constantly getting reminded by some of your senior members that you are not in US now. Okay, this doesn't work. I remember being told that and constant reminded me that this is not how people react here. So as if like you are coming from a totally different planet, okay, and you don't know these people. So you are like, and to your Pallavi's point, you are at the end of it, you are human, okay. So you are trying to do that human interaction. So you are trying to adopt it, and then you've been constantly reminded, no, this is not how Indian people behave. Okay, you have to behave this way. You, and I say like, no, this is not how it should be, because the globalization is not only in terms of the products, globalization in terms of the mindset, I would say. So if you don't change it, it's not going to make it's not going to work. So I was constantly keeping that, okay, whatever good I have learned, good I have adopted in the working in the Western world from a leadership perspective, I think I should do that. I may not be successful at the beginning, I might struggle, but I think that will create an environment, a team, which will have a different mindset, and that will help the team members, help the team, and it took me a while, and I would say I would not say, oh yeah, everything was great, but I feel confident after a while that, okay, yes, I think I could add a value and I could create an environment which was more, I would say, respectful and basically more open to the global teams mindset, and that's
So,
what yeah.
Okay, so Amit, you changed or the teams changed? My question.
No, we adopted each other, I would say. We adopted, I would
Okay.
say, because it's not
Okay.
like it was only my way. I had to adopt literally from the cultural
Yeah.
perspective various aspects,
Mhm.
but for the better learning for both of us. Because I have to also, if when you say you have to be heard, I cannot just say, okay, I'm coming from US, you just listen to me. It's not going to work. Within some time, you will just falter and you will be ineffective. So this is not how it's going to work. However, what you can bring it on the table, and how can you create a reciprocation from both sides? I think that's where the conscious effort and conscious listening and adopting and actively work on it, because you have an intention. Okay, you have to remain intentional, and word what Abhinav used a couple of times, remain authentic. So your authenticity comes there, that yes, I am with you. Okay, we are all together. However, these are the good aspects we all can learn mutually, and then we can create an environment which will be even better for us.
Awesome. So I have a following question, but I'll go to Pallavi and then come back to you with a very important question, which, yeah, for you in particular, Amit. Yeah, go ahead, Pallavi.
Sure. I think if you were asking when it didn't kind of work for us, right? And I have so many to pick from. But
Thank you for being honest there, Pallavi.
I think I'm going to use one that's a little opposite of Abhinav, just to have some different stories out there. But
Sure.
I had a scenario when I took my first large P&L role, and I was leading a very large team, and I was a little nervous. And my very first meeting with that leadership team, I was maybe too vulnerable. And I was trying to use maybe self-effacing humor in a different way. And I had a friend that was in that meeting that was also a coach. And she came over to me at that end of that meeting and said, don't ever do that again. That I was taking too much away from my own authority when I did that. So, things are about balance, right? How do you be in charge, create that environment where everybody can grow and learn, and yet not take away from your authority? And it took me a while to kind of understand what that balance was. And so I started in the opposite way, which was too much of giving the authority away. And then I had to sort of take it back. It's easier in some ways to take it back. But I very much value that I had a coach in the room who told me that. And actually, it was actually a subordinate who had the courage to tell me.
Awesome. So that brings me to two questions, and I'm going to ask one to Amit, one to Pallavi. But before that, there's a question by Mr. Abhinav Singhal, and it's in line with what you people are talking about. So I'll straight away go and ask that. He said, have you ever experienced that being vulnerable and literally being human has been interpreted literally, and how have you dealt with it? Something similar to what you were saying, Pallavi. At times when you are vulnerable, it is taken as a weakness. And how do you guys deal with it? Like you said, there has to be a balance. What are the views of other people here?
Who is that question to? Yeah. I'm trying to think of an example. So somebody else go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think I can start there, and then
sure,
Pallavi can chime in, and so when I was mentioning about having a different in a role where you have to be in a culturally different environment, uh, naturally listening more from the people. And when I was we are trying to learn the environment, okay, and you are trying to exhibit. I won't say you are not trying to show, but you are trying to exhibit that you may not be knowing in a different cultural environment. I remember when I moved from the US to India for a role. Initially, when you're trying to learn from the people, you you're getting perceived that, okay, yeah, you are too weak, you're trying to learn from the people, I think. And that vulnerability are not very encouraged in a different cultural environment, okay. So there you have to remain conscious, okay, that am I at that threshold right now, that, okay, yes, I may not be considered as serious, or and am I losing that control? Am I giving it too much away? So that vulnerability does not mean you become so weak that you are not able to cross that threshold.
So
And
being
so
aware and having that balance
yeah, having
is
that balance, that, okay, yes, I made a conscious effort to understand it. However, now from now on, how would I toggle it, and what would I do differently to gain
awesome.
to that strongly gain the trust, and then move from here. So I think that, and that creates basically a very strong self awareness, and action from your end. Yeah.
So what I hear the three of you talk about, and based on this vulnerability and this conflict, is you have to be extremely aware of the context you are in, and the culture of the organization, the people. Else, there's a probability of you being misunderstood. That's what I take away from this whole this part of the discussion, to say, as much as you need to be vulnerable, approachable, empathetic, it is very culture dependent, it is very context dependent, and how do you take the power back, or give the power. So it's a very interesting play of having that balance to say, hey, I don't control, at the same time I cannot be controlled, if I've got it right.
Yeah. And I think having that just toolkit, right? That these are all the varieties of options or ways you can engage, you can communicate, you can in, interact with the team, and then spending the time and understanding that context before you choose a tool. I think that's where the art lies.
Okay. So, Abhinav, you answered the question I was about to ask. It sounds very simple, strike that balance. You're not giving the power away, you're still not taking the power. Question very simple. Is it that easy? And what makes it easy for you guys? Because I think you've somewhere done it right for you to be where you are today. So, is it that easy to say, you know what, I've got the right mix, and this is the, formula, these are the ingredients for getting it right every time? Do it like this and it happens, or it's a journey, it's an evolution?
For me, I think I'll just quickly go and then hand it over to Amit and Pallavi. It's a journey,
Yeah,
I
sure.
would say.
Okay.
And
Okay.
you learn from your past experiences, you learn from others' experiences to understand what works, does it work in a particular context, situation, culture. But the only red thread or the learning there is, you need to invest that time in understanding the context, culture, and listen before we choose a style. If you cannot be fixed in terms of your approach and try to copy paste across different situations, that will never work. So if you're making that investment, you have a higher chance of striking the right balance.
So no copy paste works is what Abhinav has to say on this.
That's my
Amit,
experience at least.
go
Yeah.
ahead. Awesome. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, Amit.
yeah. So I think, yeah, first of all, it's a journey, and it's a journey
Okay.
of learnings, journey of adaptability, and how passionate are you really that I would like to bring that change, whatever it is. Okay, I'll be
Awesome.
keep
Okay.
harnessing myself. I'll always make self aware of where I am, which environment I'm dealing with, because I think that becomes a very key part. Sometimes when you say, "Oh, you should know where you are right now," so when you say that, you're trying to become self-aware of the environment. So you will not, if you are in a setup in a different continents, different countries, different cultures, you should be self-aware. Okay, and even if you are in India, okay, the way I behave in Tamil Nadu versus the way I behave in Maharashtra versus the way I behave in uh, Delhi could be different, correct? We know how people react. So now just imagine, bring it to the global level from the professional environment perspective. Why the Americans won't behave differently than the Germans or than the Japanese or than Brazilian? Everybody has. So you have to be self-aware of the environment, and then act and keep churning on it, because you have to keep harnessing. It's not going to work the way I spoke to a Brazilian one time. Work does not mean, okay, now I've taken for granted this is how Brazilians are. No. You should know, okay, this is how
So you can't label people, is what Amit is telling us right now, or judge or typify them, put them in boxes. Okay, awesome, Amit. Pallavi,
Yeah, I would
like
just
to add to that?
Similarly, I would say, we talked a lot about authenticity, adaptability, and the last thing, and Amit just said it, is awareness, right? And I call this the difference between IQ and EQ. If you have very high IQ but low EQ, you're less likely to be successful in a leadership role. So being aware, and awareness, I kind of equate to EQ, but how do you have the emotional intelligence to understand the scenario that you're in and understand what is necessary in that scenario? I think that's the key to being successful in this topic of executive presence.
Awesome. So what I hear three of you also say is that learning is an integral part of the journey, and leaders are great learners. I would add to that, and correct me if my experience talks otherwise, that it's not only learning, but a lot of unlearning that needs to be done as you move ahead in the journey, because what works in one environment certainly doesn't work in the other. And Amit spoke about global versus Indian. I have had the experience of working across industries, right, from IT to financial services to manufacturing and to consulting today. I see within that also, and in only in India, and I would say only in the southern part of the country. Also, if I worked in all kind of industries, there's a huge difference in culture. There's a huge difference in the way executive presence is perceived. And that's my next question to you. You're talking geographies which are more larger, or industries which are more wider. What has been your experience in how executive presence is perceived in different geographies and different industries? Because Abhinav has different industry experiences, right, from consulting to non-consulting. Amit, you moved across geographies in the same kind of industry, which is manufacturing. And Pallavi, you deal with different geographies. And how do you think executive presence is perceived differently in these geographies? And we're moving away from the components, but as a concept. And what is the importance that these people or these countries or these geographies or these cultures give to a word like executive presence? So, Amit, would you like to start?
Okay. I would say how differently it is perceived. It's more about like what are the expectations from those aspects. Okay. So it's not about the components, but I think if you talk about the India and from our continent, yeah, it's a content-driven leadership style what we have. Okay, and we believe in that. Okay, that a leader should know, and leader should be able to give the directions. Leader should be able to set up. So it's a more, and then you go about getting the trust of the people with your content, and then you start from there, and then that's how your journey starts. However, if I see based upon my experiences, that how a different part of the world considers that, a different geography. I'm talking about more from the Western countries perspective. I could see you start with, okay, am I remaining an inclusive? Am I being empathetic as a leader? You start from there, from that mindset. Okay, yeah, I have to have an inclusive mindset. Okay, then the content part comes into picture, and then you try to create an environment point of it, and then you create an environment, and that's where the trust comes into picture, because you go about it. So you have a different, I would say, aspects of characters. When you talk about, okay, I'm being passionate or being disciplined, could be differently perceived in the different cultures. Okay, and
Okay.
I would say you create an environment in either of the situations. What as a leader, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create an environment
Okay.
where the executive presence can be felt or can be exhibited. And I think that's where the differences lies, as I described.
Awesome. Abhinav,
I'll just take
across
one.
geographies, across industries.
Right.
So, what was your
I'll
experience?
just take one example across geographies to begin with. I feel, and we just talked about we should not box people, right? So this comes with a big caveat because
Go
geography is
ahead.
a
Yeah.
very broad term, and
Yeah.
everyone would have a different
Yeah.
experience and style and story. But typically in Western civilizations, I feel the role of a leader is to focus more on the why and the what, right? So what's the purpose? Because people there are more intellectually aware, they are more open to challenging and problem solving on a particular topic. So you need to spend that extra effort in understanding the why in that audience, and as an executive, that's one area you need to focus in terms of your communication. What's the purpose, why are we doing it, versus in Asian cultures, the focus is more on the how. So there, I think as a leader, your leadership style is focused on giving more clear, specific directions and coming across somebody who's in charge and who can just tell them what needs to be done, and the team can go around and execute because they're open to following that. They're not always trained to problem solve and challenge, right? They're okay to getting an instruction and just executing it. So I think that's one area of difference on focusing on the why versus the how across
Mm-hmm.
Western and Asian cultures. I think on industries, the other dimension which you can bring is, I feel in industries, typically for example in manufacturing, more traditional industries, people who tend to have a certain functional experience, for example. So if you take a manufacturing industry, somebody who comes from supply chain operations would be would come across more credible versus somebody in FMCG industry where marketing and sales function is primarily the more value creating one, and there the marketing leader might come across more credible. So that's another interesting take, right? What experience, based on the industry you are, what experience is valued more or thought of as more leading function versus the lagging function in a particular sector.
So, Abhinav, we are lagging time. Otherwise, you've opened a Pandora's box right now by saying, it is very functional in traditional industries, which I completely agree with. And I could have had a different level of discussion because we have people from different industries where, lag and lead, functions do play a critical role on how perceptions are made. And being from the HR fraternity, I always believe HR is not given its due credit. So thank you for touching that raw nerve for me right now. But yeah, over to you, Pallavi, for that answer.
Yeah, I mean, similar to Abhinav, I would call it, is it in a hierarchical kind of culture where people are looking for the leader to just tell them what to do? Or are you in a more collaborative kind of culture where it's expected that people are engaged in a dialogue about how to go about doing something, which is why the why is very important. So I think, countries fall into those, and then there's a spectrum sort of in between, and you need to really understand the context of the environment that you're in. Again, be aware to figure out how you're going to engage. I'd also agree that industries are very different in terms of how they operate. And some industries are, in fact, more hierarchical than other industries. So I think about, maybe industrial kind of environment is more hierarchical because there is a lot more structure in order to create a product that's required. And so that becomes more hierarchical. And then I spent a lot of time working in our education industry, working with universities in the US, and there's almost no hierarchy. It's the only place we say where 99-1 is a tie. Because everything is so collaborative. So you do have to adjust not only in the country, but in the industry that you're in. I agree with that. And so it makes the job intellectually interesting, right? To do that.
So that was a very interesting discussion, and I actually can go on with a lot of more questions that I have, but we need to keep time in mind. So one last one-line advice for you of yours to the leaders of tomorrow, leaders who really want to go global, no matter where they are. And a lot of young leaders do watch us. So what is your one-line advice to them? And we will start with you, Amit, for this.
Okay. Be truthful to yourself and be hungry to change.
Oh, okay. Abhinav.
I would say openness to experiences and learning based on that.
Awesome. Okay. Pallavi.
Authentic, adaptable, aware.
Wow. So that was the. Thank you. So I would, Pallavi has very beautifully summed up what was one of the key learnings we had. Some of the other things that I would like to remind all the young people who are listening in to us, that your goals and focus is extremely important, because you need to adapt based on that. You can take a back seat or let your guards down once in a while if your goals and focus is clear. Culture, context, and content does play a very important role. So please do not neglect that at any point in time, because that was my key learning from the session that we had. And thank you so much. And of course, one very important thing is your mindset does play a very important role. So it's all here, what you see and how you want to get perceived. So thank you so much, Pallavi, Amit, and Abhinav, for such an engaging session. It was truly an eye-opener for me in many ways. I do take back a lot of points with me. And I'm sure the people listening in to us would have a lot of questions for you. So I would request you to actually answer those questions in case they post in their questions even later, because we do understand a lot of people are listening to you from different geographies, still groggy, some of them in the US, and people are off to sleep in Japan. So we would request people to ask their questions to the three leaders, and they would be happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much for coming into this panel discussion today. It was a pleasure talking to the three of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and all of you listening in, please take care, stay safe. Till next Sunday, when we have another episode of Fireside. This time we are bringing in three women leaders leading in to the Women's Day celebration that happens on 8th of March. So see you on the other side. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.